So, we're holding Ayin Dalet Amud Aleph. The beginning discusses three very similar malachas: Zoyra, Boider, and Merakid. Winnowing, choosing, and sifting. They're all here to separate the good from the bad, but they're counted as separate malachas. The reason is because they all were present in the Mishkan, and they're all important parts of the process of making bread. That even poor people don't skip that part of the process. And therefore we count it as one of the 39 malachas. However, crushing the kernels of wheat in order to remove the thin skin, although that definitely wasn't the Mishkan when they made the dye, because they did it in a proper way, nevertheless, since poor people skipped that part of the process, we don't count it as part of the Lamites malachas. Now we're referring to the malacha of Boider. There are three rules that people know in halacha about Boider, which is, one, that you have to choose the good from the bad. Second, you have to do it with your hand or with a fork, which is the way that you eat, not with a keli, which is not the way of eating. And the third thing is that it has to be for immediate use, not for later on. Now that will be derived from this Gemara. We won't see it right away. The idea is like this. Some malachas are an action which you see right away why it's considered the malacha. Cooking, baking, cutting wheat. But then there are malachas which it's only because of the fact I'm not really doing anything. I'm just taking out bits and pieces from some pebbles from the wheat. What am I doing over here? I didn't create anything. But since this is a process which is done to prepare food for long-term use, that's what makes it into malacha. The style of doing it, the result of doing it, it's not a black and white malacha. It's more of a preparation that since it's a preparation for long-term storage, therefore it's considered the malacha. And therefore if I choose the good of the bad, which that's the way I usually eat, not the way I prepare, then that's not considered a malacha. Plus, it has to be for immediate use. That's the way I'm doing it to eat, not to prepare. Plus, it has to be with the way I eat, with my hand or with the utensil, which is part of my eating, not a utensil that I use as part of preparation. So let's see it inside. In the Gemara, it wasn't so clear. Let's take it step by step. A very interesting brayso. If someone had food in front of him mixed with rubbish, mixed with things that he wants to remove from it. You may choose and eat. You may choose and leave for later. But don't choose.
But hey, borer doesn't have to be rubbish and good. You can have borer here.
We'll talk about that.
Two different type of foods.
We'll talk about that in a second.
Promise me?
But don't choose. And if you chose, you have to be in the Chabad. Now I'm really confused. Choose to eat right away. No. Choose, you can even put for later. No. Don't choose. Now, not just don't choose, even chayiv chatas. What are you saying? Obviously, he's talking about different cases. What are those cases? Now, it has to be cases that make sense, and there has to be cases that you don't have to write anything in the brayso, and you can figure out what the brayso is saying. So we have a very tough challenge. Let's see. My Kama, what are you saying? You don't have to ask me questions. What are you saying? This is what he's saying. When it says you can choose and eat, it doesn't necessarily mean for immediate use. It means even for later on in the day, as long as it's for Shabbos. As long as it's for the same day, it's not called preparing food. It's called eating food. I'm preparing for a second later, for an hour later, for a few hours later. It's not preparing for storage. It's not called a malacha. You may choose and put aside for others to be used on that same day, not just for yourself. But for after Shabbos, then you're not allowed to choose. And if you chose for tomorrow, that's already considered preparing food for storage, and that's already considered the malacha. Says Rav Chisda, that does not make any sense. We never saw that an action could be considered preparation And the fact that you're doing it for after Shabbos makes it preparation, and for Shabbos it's not preparation. Why? You might be doing it a second before the end of Shabbos, and if you're doing it for Motzei Shabbos, it's a problem. And you might be doing it for just when Shabbos came in, and if it's for just for Shalosh Shudas, then it's not a problem. That's not a normal criteria to differentiate whether it's preparation or it's eating. And the fact that it's for Shabbos or after Shabbos makes no difference because you're not allowed to bake for Shabbos. In other words, if the action is considered preparation, Shabbos or not Shabbos makes no difference. And if it's not considered preparation, after Shabbos it makes no difference. Maskiv Rav Chisda asked a strong question. Are you allowed to bake for Shabbos? If it's considered preparation, the fact that it's for Shabbos doesn't help. May you cook for Shabbos? Of course not. The difference is very different.
You mean cooking on Shabbos, not for Shabbos?
On Shabbos, for
You
Shabbos.
said for.
On Shabbos, for Shabbos. Are you allowed to?
No, yeah, you have to say for, because just for Shabbos could be on Friday.
You can choose a small amount of food. You can even put it down for later if it's a small amount. Why? Because although usually on Shabbos the amount does not make it allowed, I'm not allowed to bake, as we'll see soon, a small amount, although you don't have to bring a korban chatas. But by boirer, since the action is not a malacha, it's just the idea that I'm preparing. If I do a small amount, it's not called preparing, it's called eating. So again, you can choose less than the amount. Less than the amount, less of the size of a dried fig. Do not choose the size of a dried fig. And if you did, then you have to bring a chatas. So the difference is if it's the amount of a dried fig or less. Again, the Gemara does not accept this. Although it does make sense logically, but we never found a malacha which depends on the size. If it's not allowed in a large size, half of the size is not either allowed, because it will add up to the full size. Maskif lo Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef asked a strong question. Are you allowed to bake less than the significant amount? There's no such a thing. If a full amount is not allowed, a half of it is not either allowed. Who cares if logically it looks like preparation? It doesn't look like preparation. It's the half of the amount that will be a problem. You may choose for immediate use if it's with your hand. You may choose and put aside for later if it's with your hand. If you're taking a funnel or a plate, and you're using them in order to choose the food, it's not the way you would eat it. Although it's not utensils which are designated for choosing either. It's a random utensil, which is not the way of eating, but it's not the way of choosing. So then, lo yivra, don't choose. But the imbir potter. If you chose, you're not chayiv because it's not the usual way. Anything which you didn't do in the usual way, you're potter. You're not allowed to because it's not the way of eating, it's the way of preparing, but you're potter. Potter avalasu. Ubenafo v'kvar, if you use a sieve, if you use a special utensil in order to separate the whatever you want to throw away from the food, then chayiv chat mimbir la'ivra mimbir chayiv chatas. Then you have to bring a chatas as a rice. Now this we'll see soon. We do accept this rule halacha from a different source, but in this brisa, the Gemara is not happy to say that when the brisa said you may choose, it means to say with your hand. And when it says you're not allowed to choose, it means to say with a utensil. It's a basic detail missing in the brisa. You didn't tell us that. You can't add conditions that weren't mentioned. Maskiv lo Rav Hamnuna. Rabbi Muna asked a strong question. You have a good point, but I can't explain that in the Brisa. Midi does it kanon v'tamchi katani. Does it say in the Brisa anything about a utensil? You're adding a whole big detail. It doesn't mention even the beginning of it. Let's look at just the fact. What does it mean, boyer? You have good and bad mixed together. So it's different types of separating good from bad. You may choose and eat, which means you're choosing the good from the bad. You may choose and even put aside for later, good from the bad. But don't choose if it's the bad from the good. Now, you didn't add any other objects which weren't mentioned in the Brisa, so it should fit. But still, Abaye asked the question and him, no. There's a basic condition over here that's missing. It's the opposite. Here I chose the good from the bad. Here I chose the bad from the good. It's an opposite action. You didn't even mention a hint for that. You just said you could choose and you can choose. Say the basic difference. What I chose from what? Does it say anything about what you're choosing from what? It must be in the words of the Brisa. So let's see. Like this. Again, we're not arguing on the halacha of the last two things. We're arguing on the explanation in the Brisa, which will force us to say that the Brisa is saying an additional condition. And then we'll find Brisas for the first two, and that's how we'll be left with all three conditions. Bayr v'oichel means la'alter, immediately. Ubayr u'miniach, you can put it aside for later, but la'alter. What does that mean? It means for that meal. I'm right before the meal, I'm in the time preparing for the meal. So I'm not eating immediately. I'm just preparing it for that meal that I'm going to eat now. It's the time of preparation. I came from shul. I'm setting up the table. I'm preparing this particular meal. So that's called miniach. I'm putting aside for later, but la'alter, for immediate later. However, if I'm putting it aside for later on in the day, not for the immediate meal, lo yivrer, you're not allowed to choose. But if you did choose, it's the same as if you would choose in order to store it for a much later use, the chayiv chatas. So here I didn't add any additions to the Brisa. I didn't say a new utensil. I didn't say a different thing you're choosing, the same choosing. For immediate, okay. A bit later, but immediate suda, okay. Later than that, no. So it fits, everything's written in the Brisa. Eat, put aside for soon, but don't do anything else, which means not later than soon. And if yes, you're chayiv chatas. So you don't have to add anything which is not mentioned in the Brisa. Everything goes smooth. Amru Rabbanon kamei the Rabbi. The Chachamim told Rabbi Abaye's explanation in the Brisa, and Abaye was the one who usually argued with Rabbi. Amar he told him, yes, Shaper Amar Nachmeni. Abaye's real name was Nachmeni. He was adopted by Rabbi, which was the son of Nachmeni, so he called him Abaye, my father, as in the one who's named after my father. So his real name was Nachmeni. So Nachmeni said, wow, he has a good point. He has a good pshat. I like his pshat. His pshat is very, very, very correct. So like this, we're left with Abaye's pshat, which seemingly would sound like you can choose anything for immediate use. You can choose anything for a bit later, the su'udah, but you cannot choose for later than the immediate su'udah. Now, we don't know yet about the detail of good from bad or bad from good, because he didn't...
Is this word not to choose but separate?
Separate. So, you cannot separate. He didn't say a difference if you separate the good from the bad or the bad from the good, because it didn't mention it in the Brisa. He didn't mention about if you use a utensil or not. It didn't mention it in the Brisa. We don't know. So soon we'll see that there are other Brisas which do bring those two details. Let's see. There was a Brisa that was quoted by two Chachamim. It started off like this. One had two types of food in front of him. And since I want one and not the other, the one that I don't like is considered as if the bad, and the one that I like is considered the good. So I have two types of food. I separated the one that I liked, let's say, and I ate it immediately, or I took what I wanted and I left it for a bit later. Let's say, like we said before, for the immediate meal. Rav Ashi Masni Potter. Rav Ashi said, you're not allowed to, but you don't bring a chatas. That's the way that was his version in the Bryce. Rabbi Yirmiyah Medifti Masni Chayiv, his version was Chayiv. Now, 1 second, we just said before you're allowed to. Why are you telling me not allowed to? Potter Chayiv, you're allowed to. Says the Gemara. That's one question, but then there's another question. Rav Ashi Masni Potter Votoni Chayiv. There's a different brisa elsewhere which clearly says this line that if you have two types of food in front of you and it shows your chayiv. So forget about the brisa before, but these two brises, Rav Ashi's version and then the brisa which everyone agrees says chayiv, contradict each other. Says the Gemara Lekashia. The brisa which says potter b'konin v'tamchu are talking about that I use the funnel or a plate, a utensil which is not designated for separating. The brisa which says your chayiv b'nafal kvara, I use the seed which is designated for separating. So here we have a clear brisa or two clear brises which do validate the condition Rabbi Yosef mentioned earlier, that if you use a utensil which is not designated for it, it's not allowed but you're potter. If you use a utensil which is designated, it's not allowed in your chayiv. So we cannot say it in the earlier brisa, but we have a different brisa. Okay. Now we still don't know anything about what you're separating from what, the good from the bad or the bad from the good. Now, although we solved this brisa, this puzzling brisa, which said you could choose for now, you could choose for later, you can't choose in your chayiv chatas. I'm sorry, you can't separate them, Michaim Chantas. So we had this puzzling brisa. Everyone offered their explanation. Abaye said his final word. Rabbi agreed to it. So we know we're very smart people. But the people in the time of the Gemara, some of them were puzzled with this brisa. One of these people that were puzzled was Rav Bivoy. Or maybe he was puzzled. We don't know. He might have been puzzled. And there was a story, something that he did, which may be the reason that he did it was because he didn't know how to explain the brisa. So he refrained from any separating. He doesn't know when it's allowed. He can't understand the brisa. He just doesn't do anything. He doesn't separate at all. Not good from bad, not bad from good, not now, not later, nothing. I don't know. So let's see. Kiyasa Abdimi. When Abdimi came from where to where? He came to Babel, maybe. Amar, he said like this, he came to Babel from Eretz Yisrael. He said, Shabbato de Rav Bivoy. It was a Shabbos when Rav Bivoy was the waiter. It was his job to serve the food in front of the Talmidim in the yeshiva. V'iklu Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yasi, great rabbis came to town, came to the yeshiva. Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yasi, the Talmidim of Rabbi Yechanan. Shanda Kamayu, he threw in front of them on the table, Kalkola de Pedi, a basket of food. There's two ways to explain it. There's Rashi and there's Tosfos. Rashi says he spread it out on the table. Why? It seems like he was refraining from actually separating the good from the bad. We're not sure. But the possibility was that he was refraining from separating the good from the bad. So he just spread it out and therefore it separated on its own. Now, he could have done it differently. He could have just taken the fruit out and put it in front of them. So, could be the reason why he didn't do it, because he didn't know if you're allowed to separate the fruit from the good from the bad. Who says? I don't know. I don't know how to understand the brisa. Or you could say, if you spread out in front of the table all the fruit, it looks very generous with all the leaves and everything around it. Instead of giving you one apple or one fruit, it's like a bunch in front of you, all spread out. It gives a very generous impression. So we're not sure why he did it. Let's see it inside. Shada Kamai, he threw in front of it, Kalkola de Pede, a basket of fruit. I do not know Is it because the sarva that he holds, so that you're not even allowed to separate good from the bad? He wanted to show that he's generous. Now, that's Rashi's pshat. Tosfos says no. Shada kamayim means he put in front of them the full basket. He didn't take out the fruit. And again, I don't know if he put the full basket in front of them because he didn't want to separate the fruit. He didn't know. He says, let the rabbis show me what they're doing. Or he just wanted to show that he's generous. Now, who cares? We know, as we'll see soon, that you're allowed to separate the good from the bad. So why are we so involved in trying to figure out what Rabbi meant? Why he spread it out in front of him? It could be the reason is, according to Rashi, which says that he spread it out in such a method of just letting it separate on its own. Is this a proper method that we could use in order to separate good from the bad? If I have a bunch of things mixed together and I can't just, I'm not separating it for immediate use. Is there a solution of just spreading it out and let it separate on its own or not? It depends what Rabbi held. If he held that you're not allowed to separate the good from the bad, then we see that this is a solution. And if he was just trying to be generous, we don't see that this is a solution. That's according to Rashi. According to Tosfos, I'm not sure. 1 second. According to Tosfos, the idea is like this. The question is, why didn't he separate it in the kitchen? Why did he bring the whole basket in front of them? We're not sure if he holds that a bit before the meal, there's a problem to separate the good from the bad. So then it's a question of halacha. But why am I saying the first pshat? Because there's a lot of poskim learn from this Rashi that there's a solution of spreading out things that are mixed together. If you can't separate them, just spread them out and they separate on their own. According to what we explained, it's not so simple because it could be that the Gemara is not saying that you're allowed to do it. The Gemara is just saying, I don't know. So if you don't know, then you don't know. You can't do it. So I don't know. That's just an observation of the story in the Gemara. I'm not sure what we could learn from this Gemara. Now the final thing where we do see this idea of separating good from bad. So there was a statement of a murder called Chizkiah. The story was like this. There was a special type of beans. I don't know exactly what it's called. It's called turmusin in Hebrew. And you have to cook it 7 times. You change the water each time. You have to cook it 7 times with its peels or leaves. And in the beginning, it's bitter. And after 7 times of cooking it, it becomes tasty.
It's a type of a bean.
Yeah, type of a bean. So the thing is like this. Although the food is the bean, and the peels and the leaves, whatever is there, the peels are the things you're going to throw away at the end. But until you actually cooked it the 7th time, the beans are inedible and the peels are helping it become edible. And every bean that you remove helps the remainder of the beans become edible more quick because there's more of a flavor coming from those peels. The balance of the peels to the beans is much more peels than beans. So let's wait. So Chizkiah said like this. Chizkiah, Habayir Turmusin, one who separates these beans from the peels. Chayav. Says the Gemara, why? Lema, are we going to say Kasavar Chizkiah holds? So you cannot remove good from the bad? No one holds that. Says the Gemara, shiny turmusin. The beans are different. The shalkele shiva zimni. You cook them 7 times. Vile shalkele, if you're not going to cook them misrach, they are not edible. Therefore, when I remove 1 bean from this mixture, I'm taking the bad from the good. I'm helping the rest be able to be prepared quicker and better, and therefore it's considered separating the bad from the good. So from Chizkiah we see that you're not allowed to separate the bad from the good. So, to summarize, we had a puzzling brisa which said like this: you can choose for immediate use, separate for immediate use. You can separate for a bit later, for later. You cannot separate, and you're chayiv chatas. What's going on here? So first he wanted to say you can separate for Shabbos, but not for after Shabbos, because that's already called preparing. So the Gemara said no. Shabbos and not for Shabbos, that doesn't make a difference whether it's called preparing or not. If it's called preparing, it's not allowed for Shabbos, and if it's not allowed for after Shabbos either. It's allowed for after Shabbos also. So then we tried to say maybe it's if you separate a small amount, less than a dried fig, then it's allowed. And if it's more, then it's not allowed. So no, there's no such a thing. Whenever it's not allowed, the smallest amount is not either allowed. Although logically, the small amount is not called preparing, but there's no such halacha. So then we said, no, maybe it's saying that if you if you separate with your hand, it's fine. With a utensil which is not designated for it, you're potter. A utensil which is designated for it, you're chayiv. It's a true halacha, as we'll see soon from a different brayso. But the Gemara does not accept that this is the pshat in this brayso. He didn't mention a basic detail. He didn't mention anything about utensils. So then we tried saying it depends. If you separate the good from the bad, it's okay. Even for a bit later. The bad from the good is not okay. But the Gemara said, no. Again, it's a basic detail which is missing from the brayso. Says Rabbi, the brayso, you don't have to add anything. Just read it and translate it and it's fine. You can separate for immediate use. You can separate for a bit later for the meal which is just ahead of you. You cannot separate for later on after the meal. Because that is as if you're separating for storage and then you're chayav Shabbos. So it's saying very simple things without having to add any detail. And Rabbi agreed to that. Was Abayi's explanation. Rabbi agreed to him. Then we brought another two braysos, which was talking about two types of food. And one said if you separate for eating or for putting away your potter, the other one says chayiv. But we said it's allowed if you're separating the good. Because there it's talking about with utensils. The one that says potter is talking about a utensil which is not designated for it. The one that says chayiv is a utensil which is designated for it. Then we had a story of Rabbi, which either spread out the food, or he, with all the good and bad mixed together, or he put the basket just in front of them. And we weren't sure why he didn't separate the good and put it in front of them, or separated it before in the kitchen and put it in front of them. Is it because he's puzzled with the brayso? That's what Rashi learns. He doesn't know how to learn it. And therefore he says, I can't do anything. Or are you just trying to be generous? Or according to Tosfos, maybe he holds that a bit before the meal is already a problem, so you just put the full basket. And then we had Chizkiah, which said that you cannot take the beans, which you have to cook with their peels, out of the peel. Why? Because the more beans to peels, the less sweet it's going to be. The more peels to beans, the more sweet it's going to be. So if you separate a bean from the peels, you're actually separating the bad from the good, and you're helping its preparation. And then we said a possible explanation in this Gemara of Rabbi. Why does Gemara B'chlal bother to figure out whether what did he mean? If anyways we don't pass it like him halacha. Maybe we could say that the question is this a solution when it's not allowed? Can you spread things out in order to separate them or not? And it seems like the Gemara isn't sure. And the Gemara stays with the question.